Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Apostate of Mind. I'm Mark Peralta, and today I have the great pleasure to bring an expert guest. His name is Lorence. He's one of my colleagues over at Blasphemous Bible, and I'm so glad to have him with me. And it is with great honor, sir. Welcome, Lorence. How you doing?
Dude, I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm sure this is going to be a lot of fun. We were talking about this before recording. Going to be talking about the Four Horsemen. I love Revelation as a book in general. It is by far my favorite book of the Bible because it is so filled with incredibly detailed imagery. The author, that we just call him John of Patmos, right? Like we can't really know much more than that. It's definitely not John the Apostle, and it's definitely not the guy who wrote the Johannine epistles.
Wait, that deserves like one of those.
Yeah, you're right. Crazy. So the imagery is so incredible in this book. And when you first read it, it does kind of feel like a trip. But the more you look into the historical context, the more you realize that it's actually a coded polemic against the Roman Empire. And in my view, it's specifically a polemic against the imperial cult, which was pretty common at the time. And everyone has their own ideas about, some of the specifics, but generally it's been agreed that this is a coded polemic against Rome. And there is a lot of evidence in support of that. Now, I do have to preface this by saying that, Chrissy Hansen has told me about a book that was published, I think a couple years ago now, that argues that it's not about Rome. And to be entirely honest, I have not read that book yet. I've had a lot on my plate recently. So with that little addendum, as of right now, I am in the camp of this is about Rome. And I think the imagery is incredible, and it plays off of so many things. There is the author, John of Patmos, is incredibly well read. And when it's all kind of put together, it does seem like a trip. You kind of start, once you make those links to like Old Testament stuff or even, some apocryphal stuff, you start to see the cultural milieu that's behind this book. And that's why I think it's so absolutely incredible. We did a reading of the entire thing on my channel, Milwaukee Atheists. So if anyone is interested in like the full thing, we do have that on there. I've done videos on Revelation, especially my one on Forged Fiction. It's the Forged Fiction series, and the last one of that was Revelation, which was just a banger name for a series, by the way. And I got to give that one up to my producer, Chris. He came up with that one. But
it's so important that you mentioned that. What's this book really about? Because at least for me, as growing up Christian, we always thought that Revelation is a book about the future. It's a book about the end of the world. It's a book about one apostle that was exiled somewhere and took magic mushrooms and had a vision of the heavens. And that's what this book is about. It's about the future, and it looks terrifying. And like, I remember when I was a pastor, I started like a Bible study to go through, like one of those home Bible studies with other fellow believers. And people were not like happy about it. Like they would rather avoid reading the book because of the fears and the thoughts that would come to mind as of like what it sounds like it's saying. So for you to tell me that, and I agree with you, I see that now, that this is more of a polemic against an empire. It has a political agenda. It has other agendas, not necessarily like this, what I used to think, so that you should be able to read Revelation again a little differently now if you don't have those things. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, the early church fathers, or earlier church fathers, had a lot of pause with a book like this too. I mean, it wasn't even fully accepted in like universally into canon until like the 7th century, I believe. There
Oh
was,
wow, really?
yeah, there were still a few straggling communities that hadn't quite accepted it.
Mm.
But generally speaking, it was accepted fairly early. But yeah, like I said, it wasn't universally accepted until around the 7th century, I believe.
And
So,
most likely not John, the beloved disciple, right?
right, right. The beloved disciple. That's another thing.
That's even another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the beloved disciple is a fun thing because I think the beloved disciple is a kind of like an idealistic version of a believer. Like this is what like the perfect believer should kind of be like. And I think that one
Mm.
of the, and I mean like the beloved disciple that's always hanging around Jesus in the Gospel of John, the one who's always there before Peter,
Mm.
the one who's always one-upping Peter in so many funny ways. So Peter goes up to Jesus, and who is like chilling out with Jesus already? Ah, it's the beloved disciple.
Right.
When Jesus dies, they run over to see the tomb. Who gets there first? Ah, it's the beloved disciple.
Of
Like
course.
he's just there to one up Peter, because to me that kind of speaks of like this Johannine community having this supremacy in their heads against the Petrine community,
Mm.
and I think that's so funny. I think that is so funny.
Yeah, I can see
that
how
they
that
wrote
can
their guy into it.
exactly, yeah, influence their own spin on the events. That is crazy. So then we're not thinking the same John here. We're thinking a completely different John. Who is this? Who is this other John?
Yeah, good old John of Patmos, and we call him that because he got exiled to the island of Patmos. And now, from what it seems from the text, it kind of sounds like it's for being like a Christian. That was his big crime, and that's why he got exiled, for preaching the word of God. So we just call him John of Patmos. Like I said, it's not the same John that wrote the gospel, and that even then, like that's a later kind of associated name, right? But it's not the same guy who wrote the Gospel of John. It's not the same guy who wrote the Johannine epistles. This is a different John. And the thing with the Johannine epistles is it has its own story. I also love those texts. Very interesting stuff. I'm thinking about, right, if I ever do get to that point, I want to write a dissertation on the Gospel of Truth and its relationship to the Johannine community, because there are a lot of similarities in their theology. So there's a part of me that's like, what if the whatever sect wrote the Gospel of Truth, what if that's the sect that broke off of the Johannine community in those early days? Yeah, because they are very similar theologically. So that is something that I want to do in the future, kind of write a thing on that. But it would take like a lot more, effort, obviously.
Yeah. So for my audience that's not aware of the Gospel of Truth, what are you referring to?
All right. So there is an apocryphal text called the Gospel of Truth. And so it starts off by essentially calling itself the Gospel of Truth. But we kind of already knew about its existence from some references in the Church Fathers. And I believe the Gospel of Truth was part of the Nag Hammadi library, part of that discovery.
Okay.
So we kind of linked it up based on that. There is still like a little bit of like, well, is this really the same text that we're talking about here? But generally it's been seen as, so this is the text that like I believe Irenaeus. Yeah, Irenaeus wrote against all heresies, right? So he references the Gospel of Truth, and a lot of scholars have kind of linked that as being the same Gospel of Truth that we discovered. although that is still technically up for debate. That's not like a solid thing, but people have generally accepted that.
Okay. Yeah, that certainly deserves some looking into it for sure.
Yeah, but
So
like,
that there's so many intricacies about the early church that most people don't know about. Certainly, all these controversies and divisions and
yeah, early Christology is super fascinating to me. That's probably my favorite field of theology because, like, at least from my standpoint as an atheist, it's kind of like seeing two fandoms argue over like their lore. Like none of it's true, right? Like if you're talking about like I believe that there is, like, would Scooby-Doo fans include the Scooby-Doo like what was it, the like the ones where like it's actually like human actors and stuff like that? Do they include that in their Scooby-Doo canon? And like how does that affect who the characters are, stuff like that, right? Like seeing those kind of like debates over that stuff is just so interesting to me, because
right.
and the thing is, the part that's really fun to me is putting myself in their shoes. Like if I am reading these texts, what can I get out of it? What is, without having any tie to some church tradition or to some particular Christology, what would I get out of it? And that's always so much fun to do as like an outsider.
And these guys were doing practically the same. They were all competing over their favorite fan fiction version of their hero.
Right, yeah.
And perhaps not in a trivial sense. Maybe they had their own reasons for, because I've been reading on Richard Miller's book on resurrection and blah blah blah. I forgot the title, where he talks about like these translation fables that were part of like this literary framework where important people of the ancient times were after they died, they were given a certain treatment, a literary treatment. They were given public treatment, like with an effigy where they would have like a wax figurine of it would have been like Caesar Augustus, for example, or Julius Caesar, one of the emperors, and have like everyone like notice this, how the body would disappear, part of like this larger framework of we're trying to steer people away from thinking that our diseased emperor didn't just go to hell or to Gehenna or to the underworld, because that would have been horrible, and that would have influenced how his ideas and his teachings and his attitudes, his whatever he stood for that was important for like society. That's something we need to preserve as part of like our Greco-Roman identity and whatnot. Obviously, he explains that way better than I can. But do you relate what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get what you mean. Yeah.
So I can certainly see how you have some communities like wanting to emphasize a certain part of Jesus, and then taking issue with other communities kind of seeing things a little differently, perhaps.
Yeah. And the thing is, at the time, because the communities were so small, for a certain amount of time, and pretty close knit, there was a lot of debate within them. So you kind of see that coming out in different, like even different Gnostic groups, right? So you have like the Sethians, you have the Valentinians, and like then you have like general concepts like Docetism and adoptionism, right? And then all those different iterations. And it is a super fascinating topic. And then once you get to the councils, oh boy, does it ramp up a lot. That's why I love studying the councils, because there's quite a bit more politics involved, especially with the first few. the Athanasius was always kind of caught in the middle of those those first couple ones. It's a really interesting story. I do go over it on my channel. I have a series for the ecumenical councils, but it's a really cool subject, and I feel like when it comes to a work like Revelation, you still have like this other view that's coming through, but he kind of the author has to put that together with his eschatology, and at the same time make a very directed attack that the Romans, if they're not familiar with the Jewish writings, they wouldn't get it. But for people who did know about that stuff and knew about it pretty well, it'd be an instant fucking hit. And I think that Revelation is just, it is the last book of the Bible. And I think it's also a very good end note.
Mm-hmm.
And I have been a big fan of Revelation.
Excellent. So with regards to chapter 6, what do we need to know before we start reading and getting into that?
So, I mean, a lot of this stuff I am probably just going to cover like as we read, but it is important to note, at least because we're doing, the Four Horsemen, right? Kind of how these horsemen would be viewed, kind of other motifs of horsemen in the Bible. And if anyone's interested for like a long form of something like this, you can see my video Heavenly Horsemen on it. But in the biblical text, right, like there's this motif of like divine charioteers, right? Like when we have is it Elijah? I think, was he the guy that got carried up, the prophet that got carried up, right? So he kind of goes up on a chariot, on a fiery chariot to heaven, and then I think later, still within the Elisha cycle, we get this vision of heavenly horsemen. Like there is. Let me pull up the verses real quickly here, because there is while it definitely stands out like in the moment, when you read about it, you kind of like right afterwards, you just kind of forget that it even happened. But it's such a good moment. It's actually, let's see, in 2 Kings 6. So when the Arameans are at war with Israel, Elisha shows his servant a vision of fiery chariots. His servant was like really, was really sad about the fact that there was like, I have the quote here pulled up, that there were troops, horses, and chariots everywhere. So that's in 6:15. And Elisha told him that there are actually more on our side than on the side of the Arameans. And the wording that's used, that he opened his eyes. So, he's starting to see into this different realm almost. And the servant sees, also here, pulling up the quote, the servant sees that the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. That's in 6:17. And the thing is, this one quick vision of these horses and chariots is huge, and it's super critical to kind of the idea around God and his own heavenly army. So while people have their chariots, their horsemen, which of course the iron ones, right? God has a little scuffle with the iron chariots. But
I was going to ask you, doesn't Yahweh take issue with like just having chariots, period?
Well, yes and no. He doesn't like when the Israelites get their own stuff, right? Especially from Egypt. There's a specific provision where he's like, hey, don't make sure you don't get like chariots from Egypt. I'm pretty sure that was the verse, if I'm remembering it properly. I don't remember the exact the whole passage, but that was definitely in there. So he gives this kind of command not for people not to have their own chariots, but that's okay because he has his own army, and it's a heavenly one, and it's way better. My heavenly army is better than your shitty little human army, kind of thing. So this motif of a horseman is not just in this vision where they're these where they're prepared for war, but there is also one in, I think it's in Zechariah. Yeah, okay, so I have this pulled up here. So he receives multiple visions where, and there's an angel explaining what he's seeing and stuff. But the first vision is of heavenly horsemen. It's in Zechariah 1. So Zechariah, he sees a man on a red horse. Behind him, he sees three different ones on red, brown, and white horses. So color is a little bit different there with brown if we're comparing it to the ones in Revelation. Slightly different colors there. And while there are definitely color associations with how these colors are used biblically or in the ancient world, they kind of go out from this section, from this part, and they start to they go all in all different directions, right? And they're supposed to be doing the Lord's work. So he has his own. God has his own heavenly horsemen, but they are just better than what people have. And then there is also, I kind of mentioned how it's also in some apocryphal works. So it would be in Second Maccabees. There is it's actually twice in Second Maccabees. So again, I have these pulled up here. So in Second Maccabees 3:24 through 28, a heavenly horseman and two other divine beings come down to stop Heliodorus in his tracks. Excuse me. So it seems that he's the only one able to see them. But just as in the ascension of Elijah, they do very real things. They're very much acting in the real world. In this case, they lash Heliodorus, and there's a lot of Greek influence there. There's the Hellenistic motif of him wearing golden armor, for example. Although later in the book, so in 2 Maccabees 10:24-31, there's a battle taking place between the Jews and the forces of Timothy. And during that battle, there are five heavenly horsemen appear to the opponents to defend the Jews and Maccabeus. And we're told that the enemies, we're told that the enemies see this, and we were not entirely sure if the Jews also saw it, but the enemies definitely did. But it's very interesting, how all these motifs kind of fall together into this creation of the Four Horsemen, and they each have their own imagery as well. It's really cool. This John of Patmos is working off of a lot of stuff, so that is that's kind of why, to me at least, Revelation is the most interesting book. But yeah, that's some background knowledge on the heavenly horsemen. I suppose we should also talk about the in Revelation, the seals are meant to parallel the mark of the beast, kind of while God has seals, the bad guy has marks. So what was it seals, or was it something else that was used? I think those are meant to be paralleled. They kind of go through the same phases, and I think that was pointed out by Adele Yarbo Collins in her book Crisis and Catharsis. Really good book that I suggest people read. Oh yeah, there's so much stuff that goes into.
So John of Patmos, he's reintroducing these apocalyptic horsemen, perhaps from various texts.
He's taking the heavenly horseman motif that already existed in Judaism, and he is repackaging it into this new view. And
so how are they functioning in his polemic against Rome, for instance?
So I guess that's something that I think we should leave for the actual reading.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Okay.
it's they each have their own importance.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to get into before we start reading?
No. We can hop right in, man.
Okay. Then I saw the Lamb open one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures call out as with a voice of thunder, "Come." I looked, and there was a white horse. Its rider had a bow, a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer.
Yeah. So already cool stuff. So of course, from the stuff we get before, right? The lamb it's supposed to be Jesus, right? It's revealed,
Okay.
right? But so this is the point in time where now, like in the story, in the narrative, shit's starting to hit the fan. And the cool part here about, when he says, come, right? This, where is this voice itself coming from, right? So it's one of the 4 living creatures. So there was a scene beforehand where, everyone's like surrounding, I believe it was like the throne of God or something. And there were 4 living creatures, and like, it was in like between all these angels. And we get like this kind of call out multiple times. And the interesting thing about this is that, so the word that's used there is erku.
Mhm.
And this is from the Greek erkomai, which can mean both, like the form that we have in the vocative. It can mean both come and go. So it can either be like a command to go out away from whoever is saying this, or a command to head over to the one who is saying this. So the understanding come
That's
is
crazy.
generally more is the accepted one. It would make more sense, but it is interesting that it's the same. If they were saying go, it would be the exact same phrase, which is super interesting to me, at least.
Yeah. But
And
I'm
then,
trying to see if context is helping us here, but I'm not quite sure. Just based on what's being said.
oh yeah, so the so one there was, I believe one of the possible readings was like it's an alternative reading. Come and see. That is a possible one, but like I'm gonna just hear a quote from what I had in a different video. Yeah, it's possible the reading "come and see" was a result of the confusion over why these terrifying creatures would be sent out by God Himself. Therefore, because that's the one that was like in the midst of the creatures. Therefore, the later addition to the text acted as a way to show that instead of the horseman being addressed, it was John who was being addressed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was another way for them to deal with that, because it is kind of a weird thing. But yeah, so the first rider though, because they're all being sent to go do their task, whatever it is, right? They're all sent to it, and each one has like a different purpose. So for the first one, the one on the white horse, wearing a crown and carrying a bow. So, of course, white is often associated with like purity, victory, right? These are just motifs in biblical language. And now one of the interpretations is, and this is based off of an understanding from the Gospels, right, where before the second coming, the gospel had to be preached to all nations. So this led a lot of early Christian interpreters to be like, well, this first rider is meant to be like the word that you're supposed to get, because that's the first one that comes out. Now, that's not a great explanation, but it worked for them at the time. What is instead probably being referenced is the Parthians. So they were obviously like a threat to the east, and in the first century, they were the only known mounted riders who were skilled with bows. And actually, we even have like in our modern vernacular something that kind of alludes to them. We call it a Parthian shot. And people, that's kind of, people don't really use that all that much. But when you're just really good at shooting something, Parthian shot. It doesn't really get used all that often anymore, but that is a much more modern day example. And the color white was one that was frequently used by the Parthians. And there's a whole thing. We're not going to get into it today that much, but when it comes to like Nero, for example, Nero is like the main opponent here.
Okay.
So 666 that's Nero. That's meant to be Nero. And there's a very long argument that I could give you for that, but because we're talking about the Four Horsemen, I'm going to keep it short. Nero at the time, so like when he died, he was megalomaniacal, egotistical. Like this dude was off his fucking rocker. He was deluded to all hell. So upon his death, it was a very common belief that he wasn't actually dead. Instead, he had actually run off to go hide with the Parthians, and that he would come back. And that's kind of where we get like the image of like the beast coming back, right? So that's a whole other thing on its own. But those seem like allusions to Nero. And
so I take it Nero was the emperor that was contemporary to the original audience?
Not quite. So he was like the prototypical evil emperor because he blamed like the fire
to the Christians.
Yeah. So he was like a prototypical evil emperor. But then there was a guy who also sucked a lot like Nero. That was Diocletian. Diocletian was probably the guy at the time, but they also kind of believed that Diocletian was almost like the second coming of Nero. And
that's right, because these guys had like even the second comings predicted as well, right?
Yeah, they kind of did. In some like poetry, it's kind of alluded to. Yeah.
I've also read about that. Nero was they thought that he was going to come back and persecute even more.
Yeah. So that was a very, very common thing. It's called Nero Redivivus. That I'm probably mispronouncing it, right? But it's super interesting how the context of while the opponent is Nero, it's also kind of Diocletian. But you don't want him to know. You don't want people to know. Especially you don't want Diocletian to know that you're talking about Diocletian. Right. So you kind of have to hide it under this barrage of like eschatological and like biblical motifs.
That makes total sense, and that makes sense why. How do we? What's the right term here? Like, make it into like ambiguous a little bit. Like he's not named by name,
right? He doesn't have to be.
He's codified.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of is in 666. That's Nero at least.
Right.
Yeah, it's gematria, right?
Right.
So it's super, super fascinating stuff, and that's So this association with the Parthians is there too with this rider on the white horse as well. But
gotcha.
it's super interesting text. So we can go on to the next section here.
Sweet. Okay, that's verse 3. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature call out, "Come!" And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people would slaughter one another, and he was given a great sword.
Right, yeah. So there is also some interesting stuff here. So usually this is portrayed as war, right? Now there is some textual arguments that if you'd allow me to make here. Now I think that this is actually a reference to there being civil war within the empire. So this the first one, right, about conquest, that would be war between states. But the reason why I think that, this is because it does seem almost synonymous, right? So one goes out to conquer, but this other one also seems kind of just to be associated with war. Mm-hmm. So why are there two of them? So I think this one is about civil war, which, old George Carlin joke. How do you have a civil war? So this is the guy in the red horse. So red, very obviously, color of bloodshed. The very simple one. That's everywhere. Right. That's in all like mythologies. Like red is red is associated with blood. Shocker. But yeah, this one also has a sword. So, but even though this rider has a sword, he doesn't kill anyone. Instead, the men kill each other. Mm-hmm. So distinct from the conquest of the first rider, which implies war, this rider is civil war. So it's there might have been some influence on John of Patmos from a passage in Mark. So in Mark 13:7-3, it's called the Synoptic Apocalypse. This is where we get the famous prophecy about the destruction of the temple. So some of Jesus' disciples ask him, when will all this happen? What sign? And this is from Mark 13:4. What sign will show us that these things are about to be fulfilled? Jesus informs them that there will be false messiahs, war, and threats of war. And also nation will war against nation. There's going to be earthquakes, famines, persecutions. So many of these that are described, it's what's happening in the horseman scene in Revelation. So we're going to have, famine in a second, right? But then there's the distinction between war and threats of war, and then nation warring against nation. So they're two distinct categories. And I think that they can be better understood as war and civil war, respectively. So the rider on the red horse is meant to be civil war. It might be symbolize the end of Pax Augustea. So it was like this long period of peace for Rome. Yeah, although it was only peace within the Roman Empire, which for Rome, it's kind of like it's tough to hit that bar of not killing each other all the time. But there was like a plethora of rebellions leading up to the time of John's writings at the end of the first century. So it could be what he had in mind when he was writing this, especially if he had something like the Synoptic Apocalypse in mind. Mm-hmm. All right, let's go with so that I think that's just a really good explanation for it. How one is actually war and conquest, the other is civil war.
Okay, let's see what the black horse is about.
Let's go.
Verse 5. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a black horse. Its rider held a pair of scales in his hand, and I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a day's pay, and 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine."
Yeah, so this definitely sounds like famine, but it's also rationing. You're also rationing things. That's why he brings out the weight, right? Mm-hmm. So there's of course a lot of significance to the scale, right? So in the Bible, you use a balance often as a symbol for famine. Mm-hmm. So in Leviticus 26:26, when I cut off your supply of bread, 10 women will be able to bake your bread in one oven, and they will dole out the bread by weight. You will eat, but you will not be satisfied. So this imagery of distributing food by weight is kind of what's shown here in the scales that he has. And it's also seen in Ezekiel 4:16. He then said to me, "Son of man, I am about to cut off the food supply in Jerusalem. The people will eat rationed food in anxiety and drink rationed water in despair." So the fact that it has to be rationed and distributed by weight, there's the implication of a scale there. So that's why the third rider is famine. But it's different than starvation, because in each of these cases, people don't starve to death. It's just that food is scarce. So I'm gonna pull up a note from my video on this. So further adding to this imagery is what the voice says about food prices and which products will be available. So a denarius was a full day's pay, and the point is quite clear: the cost is incredibly high. There is also most likely a contemporary reference here to the reign of Domitian. And wait, hold on. Earlier, did I say Domitian or did I say Diocletian?
I think you said Diocletian.
Fuck. Okay, no, definitely Domitian. Diocletian. Oh my god, that was Diocletian was way later. In the actual like persecution of Christians going on in that period. That was like hundreds of years later. Fuck yeah, these Roman names always get mixed up in my head. It's Domitian. So sorry about the fuck up earlier. Domitian was the guy that I was thinking of. He was like supposed to be like that reincarnation almost of Nero. Like he was the that next piece of shit emperor. I mean, Diocletian was also a piece of shit, but he was later on a piece of shit. So yeah, for anyone that stopped watching there and started typing in the comments, yeah, I get it. Sorry about that. Yeah, so got him mixed up with Domitian there. My bad. Always really bad with Roman names, honestly. I get those fucked up a lot. I'm taking a Roman literature and history course right now. I get so many names mixed up. I don't know what it is about Roman names, but they just get like switched in my head, and I don't know why. It's super annoying, honestly, because like on a test I would like think that I'm writing down the right person, but I wasn't. I was just writing down a person who had who bore like the smallest resemblance in name to the person, to the real person. But either way, during the reign of Domitian, there was a famine in Asia Minor. Bread costs were twice as high, and in 91 CE, Domitian ordered that no new vineyards be planted. He also ordered that many of the existing ones be destroyed to make room for cereals. As to be expected, there was a big outcry against this, which is kind of why we get this this whole thing about not touching the hold on, I gotta pull up the verse there. Yeah, but do not damage the olive oil and the wine. That's kind of why we get that reference there.
Yeah, and I would add that I mean, today we might take for granted the olive oil industry, but I think that in antiquity, olive oil was one of those highest commodities. Right?
Yeah, absolutely, especially out of that region of Judea. Yeah, absolutely, that was like a huge export.
And yeah, and everyone consumed it. I mean, it was part of like so many things that they did, including lamps and things of that nature.
Right. Yeah.
That's just cooking, like for the most of us. Okay, interesting. So far, 3 horses, 1 white, 1 red. That's peace, war, peace, and famine. Now, are these typifying like different? Like, are these things happening to the Roman Empire in this polemic, or what can you tell us so far?
Oh, so I mean, some of this is references to because if we're working off of like this apocalyptic view, right, and we're working off of the signs, right? Okay. Like I said before, if we're working off of something like the synoptic apocalypse, these would be like the big signs, and the author here is kind of pointing out that these signs are already coming or they're about to come.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's like tying all that in together with this horseman imagery.
I see. Okay, I'm with you. All right, great. So ready to move on?
Yeah.
Verse 7. Okay. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard a voice of the fourth living creature call out, "Come." I looked, and there was a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed with him. They were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword, famine, and pestilence, and by the wild animals of the earth.
Yeah, so this one also has a lot of really cool references in it. So first of all, the Greek word there for the color of the horse, right? So he's like kind of was it described as pale? So the word is chloros, and that's kind of our root for like something like chlorine, right?
Chlorine,
so
yeah.
Think about the color of chlorine, right? It's kind of like a sickly green. So when we're talking about this paleness, we're really talking about this yellowish green color, the color of disease. So of course he's called death, but death here is better understood as death by pestilence, to kind of go in with the color of like decaying flesh almost. So considering the meaning of chloros, the color of the horse, the identification makes a lot more sense. So we can. It's also super fascinating. Let's kind of move back here before I get into it a little bit more.
I have on halot. Oh, the color of a person in sickness contrasted with appearance in health.
Right. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So there's there's also this kind of motif that exists, like when it comes to, like, this is in like Old Testament literature, and this is what in the Synoptic Gospels is kind of being played off of. So there's a very good parallel in Ezekiel 14:21. For this is what the sovereign Lord says: how much worse will it be when I send against Jerusalem my 4 dreadful judgments, sword and famine and wild beasts and plague, to kill its men and their animals. So of course, these 4 dreadful ills are exactly what's described in Revelation 6:8. So they were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, and plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Sword, of course, we get the reference to civil war that we talked about. Plague, reference to the fourth horseman. And then famine's identification is pretty obvious there. But of course, we get the wild beasts. Now, this one is a little bit weird, right? But why the wild beasts? It might be an allusion to. Do you remember in Daniel? We get the vision of the beast. Yeah, so it might be the zoomorphic view of Israel's enemies. So,
which would have been also part of that Greco-Roman gladiator culture, right? And I don't know if it's true that Christians would be thrown to the lions and stuff like that.
Right. I think I'm also unsure about the truth value of that one.
Yeah, but I've heard the uncertainty.
Yeah, but either way, like, this is this last horseman. It's death by pestilence, and these are kind of the ills described in the Old Testament that kind of is associated with this stuff. So it is super interesting, I think. Although let's see what I can pull up on Hades real quick there.
Yeah, like why Hades in particular?
Right. Yeah. So, like, aside from the obvious connection of the land of the dead, it also says, so yeah, its rider's name was Death. Oh, actually, hold on. You know what? I answered my own question.
That's what it is?
No, I answered my own question. If death is well, yeah, it is. The rider's name is Death. It's Thanatos. If we understand this as death by pestilence, then Hades following him would be you going to the land of the dead after you die by pestilence. I actually answered my own question there.
Now, is this also just like Hebrew prophetic stuff, or apocalyptic stuff, or is this borrowing from somewhere else in the world?
I mean, this all
Like just
seems
the fact that it's using Hades.
well. This seems to be. I mean, Hades. At the time for them, I'm not sure how literally they would have taken it. Like, because at this point in time, you're talking about a very rudimentary idea of hell. Even like we're talking about, so we're still like in this period. We still find like in the New Testament they're talking about Gehenna a lot. So it hasn't fully developed into hell as we kind of have now. So using Hades, even just as a Greek term for land of the dead, it is just I don't know. To me, that kind of seems like almost idiomatic.
Okay.
So, but either way, I think that most of the stuff that they're playing off of is they're playing off of already existing biblical motifs and reframing them in a Roman framework. So like more obviously it was the stuff that we talked about before, but like this one just seems very basic. Like in the end, people are gonna die. So maybe gearing up for some expected war or something, especially in apocalyptic literature. So yeah. Which just, by the way, we should probably tell the audience this if they don't know. Apocalypsis, right? Apocalypsis just means, so the word apocalypse, it just means revelation. It means an unveiling in Greek. So like that's the first word of the book of Revelation. So like the thing is, some hidden knowledge is being revealed here. So like apocalypse doesn't necessarily have to refer to the end of the world. J.J. Collins in his book The Apocalyptic Imagination spends like the first few sections just talking about the definition of apocalyptic literature. So it's important to keep that in mind, that when we're talking about apocalypse in a literary sense, we're talking about a text where this stuff is being revealed.
Right, yeah. I think there's a better word, the eschaton.
Yeah, eschaton is for the end times. Yeah, that's the Greek term for the end.
Yeah. All right. Well, on to, is it the fourth?
Well, we just did the fourth seal.
Okay, the fifth seal.
Yeah, the fifth seal.
Okay. Verse 9. When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slaughtered for the word of God and for the testimony they had given. They cried out with a loud voice, Sovereign Lord, holy and true, how long will it be before you judge and avenge our blood on the inhabitants of the earth? They were each given a white robe and told to rest a little longer until the number would be complete, both of their fellow servants and of their brothers and sisters, who were soon to be killed as they themselves had been killed. What is going on here?
A lot of cool stuff here, right? So this is what it seems like is martyrdom. What we're talking about. At this point in time, they'd already built up a martyr, like what is it called, a martyrdom complex, or whatever the actual term is for it. They've already built that up, and when it talks about the completion of these numbers, right? There are a few things that this could be referencing. So in texts from around the same period, especially. This is very clearly seen in the Shepherd of Hermas. It's I guess you could call it pseudepigraphal work, to be more technical. So in it you have the construction of the church, but there's like a construction of a heavenly church, and whenever someone pure enters into it, like another block is put down. So I think there's also, I think Paul also has this kind of motif, right, where everyone is kind of part of this big family that are kind of building this church together, block by block. He kind of uses that imagery. So this seems to have been a common thing within these very early, Judeo-Christian communities. So the idea of getting this number to completion, because once this ends, once everyone who is supposed to die will die, once it is all done, we that's essentially, it's like we're preparing for this for the second coming, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Let
And
me
it's
see
also,
sorry, go ahead.
isn't it calling out for like revenge as well?
Yeah, the Avengers of Blood thing.
Yeah.
That's also super common in like Leviticus, right? Where you have an Avenger of Blood coming after you to you kind of pay for a murder, right? So if someone were to kill a family member and then they went off and because they were given certain lands, like certain parts of the land were portioned off, where you could wait until your trial, essentially. And the idea was that you were running away from an Avenger of Blood. So usually that'd be like a family member that is, you just killed his family member, he's going to go kill you now. So this is kind of like calling back to that old motif of the Avenger of Blood. At least there in verse 10, right? When will someone be sent out to like avenge our blood and whatever?
Okay.
But yeah, so the under the altar, the blood of sacrifice, which is his life or soul in biblical thought, drains down under the altar. The death of a martyr was conceived as a sacrifice on the altar of the heavenly temple, which combined the attitudes of the earthly temple's incense altar inside the sanctuary and its altar of sacrifice outside. So in Revelation, the altar at 8:3 and 5, and also 9:13 and 14:18 is for incense. Here at 6:7, here and at 16:7 for blood. In each case, it is linked with the vindication of the righteous in answer to their prayers. So this is, taking up sacrificial motifs as well.
Okay. So then that fits into this whole thing. These things are happening, right? And they're happening in a sequence, I take it.
Well, they in the narrative they're happening in a sequence, but these things were probably happening, in their mind. The extent of the Christian persecutions is debatable, but they obviously felt some persecution. So the author is taking that to like this next level and having it be like along with the martyrdom complex that already developed, they're taking it to this next level of, in the narrative presenting this as eschatological.
So like this was meant to be, and
Right,
that's how they're able to explain away the reality.
Yeah, we're just waiting for the completion. And whenever that heavenly group is completed, whenever all of like the chosen martyrs are all there and all set, then we're setting the stage for the big return.
Because all these things have to happen before the actual thing.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Looks like this will be the very last part of it.
Sure. Yeah.
Verse 12 through 17. All right. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and there came a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth as the fig tree drops its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll rolling itself up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth and the magnates and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one seated from the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come. And who is able to stand?
Yeah, so it kind of ends with this. This is the last thing to happen before it's essentially setting up for the day of judgment, right? There are a lot of prophetic works here that are being referenced, and a lot of callbacks to some old narratives, right? So, like in a lot of what's it called? The technical term is it the theophoric text?
You have me on that one. It looks like you're frozen.
Show on the scene. There's a technical term for it that I'm forgetting right now. But there is a lot of stuff that kind of falls in line with what is happening on the day of judgment, the things that are going to be accompanying it, the magnitude of these earthquakes, right? Magnitude of the earthquakes, stuff like the moon becoming like blood. So again, this is taking up the motifs of the Old Testament, and saying, well, like here are the things that are going to happen here, this is how they're going to happen. And it's even doing the whole thing at the end there with the kings of the earth and the magnates and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone, slave and free, hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, fall on us. Yeah, so like speaking to inanimate objects, just kind of hoping for death because the day of judgment is so great.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me of Isaiah. Elijah when he hides in the mountain and the storm's coming. That's Yahweh.
Oh,
and
yeah.
He's like, you might as well kill me, right?
Right, yeah. That's actually a thing that happens a lot, right? So like in a lot of God visions, like a lot of the time they kind of have to mask God as like Ezekiel, right? In Ezekiel 1, he doesn't see God. He sees the likeness, right? He sees something that appears like, well, for him it would be, it's supposed to be God, right? But it's the terms that are used are not divine necessarily, but he's seen the likeness of God and not God himself, because one of the fears with seeing God, of course, was death. That's I believe we recently went over a part in I think there's a part in Joshua. I forget the actual verse, but they kind of see an angel or something, but they have to make sure that it's an angel, because if they saw God, like that's why I think one of the guys like, hey, don't worry, like the angel says like don't worry, you're not going to die. And it kind of says that it's because like you're not seeing God, you're seeing an angel. If you saw God, then you'd have to worry that you would die. So we like the appearance of God is always like super huge, and this day of judgment thing has, if you read the Old Testament, it's been building up for a while. It's essentially what everything in Jewish theology is leading up to, is this final day of judgment.
Okay, but is it a day of judgment, or is it the day of the Lord?
Well, I mean, it is. I mean, it wasn't the same
thing.
Yeah, wasn't it? Where God comes back, and that is when he starts judging, and that's when he starts like either annihilating people or making them part of this new earth that he's making. Like that's kind of that's always been the eschatological feel I got from the Old Testament, at least.
Yeah. But I get the sense that it's Yahweh himself coming down, is it not?
Right. Yeah. That would be.
Right?
the idea. This is like preparing for it, right? So at the end there, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb.
So that's an addition, right, to that motif.
Yeah, they did kind of add this because there was always importance to like the being at the right hand of God, right? There was always this like position for exaltation, and that's seen in a lot of motifs, or like a lot of descriptions of like wars being won with like the help of God's right hand or something like that. So like obviously this addition of the Lamb, right, which later will I think it's in Revelation 19 where it's fully identified with Jesus, and the rider on the white horse as well. But like this is supposed to be like this reference to, of course, the sacrificial lamb, the Paschal lamb, right? But this is on like a whole other scale. This is on a universal scale where like now you even have like the whole host of heaven being mentioned, like the sun becoming black as sackcloth, the moon becoming like blood, and the stars falling to the sky. So yeah, the motif of like the heavens themselves changing, this is all like the coming day of judgment motif. And now you have this imagery of like the Lamb being the one to kind of go out and enact God's will. But like the one, of course they're afraid of death, right? Because it says right there, fall on us and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne. That would be God himself.
Yeah.
So that motif of like, if you see God, you're a dead man kind of thing is also back in full view.
And it's a very powerful image too, because like these people are like actually fearing the presence of the God in this context here more than death itself.
True. Yeah.
Right.
And the thing about like this, like even though the narrative does technically continue, since we just read through chapter 6, look at all the stuff that John of Patmos was able to fit in here. He was able to fit in like eschatological motifs that were prevalent throughout the Old Testament. He was able to throw in motifs of like God's army and let's see what else. I mean, martyrology. Yeah, he was able to throw in all these things in a pretty short text, honestly. And like this was through like the these callbacks to different parts of the Old Testament, and even things that were happening in his day that he was linking up with things in the Old Testament, because people still do that kind of stuff, right? They love doing that shit today. So, but they were doing this back then too. And the whole like, there's going to be this flipping of classes, right? There's going to be this flipping of the social order. So the kings are going to be like on the same level as like the slaves and the free, right? Everything is going to be switched socially. That was also, to come with that day of judgment in the Old Testament. So he's able to fit in all of these ideas in a fairly short narrative. Now there is another seal, right? But like it's still very well done, I think.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, he certainly has lots of knowledge of like, Hebrew Bible apocalyptic imagery, and he's using them in a coherent way.
Yeah, and he's doing what like good writers usually do. They reframe these things. Like, hot take. Right. I said this on I think the last Blasphemous Bible. The Aeneid is better than the Iliad. The Aeneid is the ripoff, though.
Right.
Like, it's the one taking all the imagery, but it's reframing it in this new way that is, in my opinion, it's better because it ends with with death. In my fiction, I like everyone to die. So the it is kind of morbid, but that's fine. I think the Iliad would be a lot better if Achilles killed Paris at the end, but no, instead they kiss and make up essentially, and they have a funeral. Fucking boring. And the Aeneid ends with death, and I'm like, yes, that's where this needed to end. Yes,
That's right. Yeah.
So it's a lot of people are gonna, maybe some people are gonna hate on me for that one, but yeah, the Aeneid's better. It's so, what was I saying? Right. So good writing often like takes those motifs that everyone in your certain community can call back to, but then reframes them in a really good way. Actually, here's an example that maybe that more people will be on board with. Have you watched Cobra Kai?
Yes,
And I guess you watched the original Karate Kid movies?
that's correct.
Yeah. So I love the original Karate Kid movies. They were great. But Cobra Kai takes all those motifs. It's able to call back to that original creation and reframe it and spin it in certain ways where it's better. It's like improving and adapting these things that this certain community of fans would be able to recognize immediately. So it's like that. So I think this is just a very well done work altogether.
Very interesting. So then make the connection here with Nero and what the archetype that he's representing here.
Well, in the section we just read, virtually nothing, but the overall view in Revelation and in Nero is that he is going to, he is the beast, and there's also this the imagery with the dragon, right? And it says the dragon with 8 heads, but it says that there's one head, that the last head is coming, he was actually one of the 7, and it's coming back. So that is also an allusion to Nero and Nero Didymus, and this idea of him being like the Antichrist, and in the reign of Domitian, so I don't fuck it up again, not Diocletian. Diocletian's someone else. I fucked up in the beginning of the show.
Shame on you.
Yeah, shame on me. But with Domitian, they kind of saw in him another Nero.
Right.
So they are reframing all of this, all the motifs of the Old Testament with the Day of Judgment, and the we have God's providence around here with the horseman motifs, and they are reframing it in such a way where like Nero within the, however you want to view him, with him and Domitian being like this is the time for all this stuff to be fulfilled, right? And so I think that framing him as the Antichrist, which by the way has a slightly different history on its own. I think it was first used in the Johannine epistles, and I think it referred to a docetic group that broke off the Johannine community. And like I said, like in my summation, that might be the ones who wrote the Gospel of Truth, but that's just a hypothesis. I'm not like super sold on that one yet. I have to do the actual study, but it's so they kind of reframe even the idea of an Antichrist, which wasn't even that old of an idea. It would have been contemporaneous. So maybe they were using this idea of the Antichrist in 2 different ways. So yeah, it's really interesting stuff, honestly.
Yeah, I find that very fascinating. Do you think the Antichrist is sort of a reworking of the one of these Messiah characters in the Hebrew Bible, or the Messianic?
The way that it's portrayed in Revelation, it's a direct working on Satan, right? Because in the Hebrew Bible, it's Satan is basically God's prosecutor.
Right.
He's part of God's divine enclave, and he has a role to play. That role is to be an accuser. So he's essentially the prosecutor. He levels the charge, and then in those final days, you're supposed to defend yourself. So it's kind of, so him being the Antichrist is like, instead of doing the saving, he's like doing the damning, right? So it is taking that motif, but it is also ramping it up in at least in imagery to this eschatological level. Yeah, so they, at this point in time, they've already like made that connection with like the whole snake in the garden thing, and very anachronistic, but they are still they're using that imagery in a much different way.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I really want to thank you, Lorence, for bringing clarity to, this very much difficult, not just a book, but chapter to interpret and understand what's actually being said, or what's in the mind of the author,
right?
Or
fun
community of authors.
Yeah, it's always incredible going through this stuff, especially Revelation. It's just such a cool book. After Revelation, my favorite book would probably be Ecclesiastes, and that's only because it's so nihilistic. I love it. I one of the shirts on my merch store, which your viewers should definitely go check out, is it's just a very sad bee, and he's sitting there, and the little title thing, or the words on the shirt are everything is meaningless, completely meaningless.
That's right.
Ecclesiastes 1:2. Favorite verse, hands down, favorite verse in the Bible, right there. I agree. Everything is meaningless.
Everything is meaningless. Yeah. Absolutely. Where can we find your merch store?
Well, you know what? The easiest way is to go on to the YouTube channel Milwaukee Atheists. Okay. Subscribe, and the whole. We have links up in the the top of the channel or whatever, or in the. I'm not exactly sure where you can find it on on the phone or something, but it's definitely on there somewhere on the channel. It is linked in our shows whenever we live stream on Wednesdays, every Wednesday, and it's always linked if you show up for the live streams. But it's I get a lot of joy in dissecting some of this stuff, because it is complicated if you don't have like historical context, and it does seem crazy on the face of it. But once you start linking it up, those parallels just keep going, and you see the links everywhere, and they are direct references, and it's really interesting stuff. So I think that John Patmos really knocked it out of the park. Really, really great work.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Lorence, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to share your insights with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. This was a lot of fun. Love talking about Revelation.
Absolutely, yeah. And I do want to encourage you folks to visit Milwaukee Atheists. It is an awesome channel. I am myself a fan. Do check out his merch, and do check out my merch, because I've also got some merch too.
Dude, you got chat everyone viewing this later. You gotta give it up for our main man of the hour, Mark. This guy is fucking goated. Look at him. Look at that beautiful face. Look at all those books and that big brain that he has.
Yeah.
This man deserves all your love and attention. Fucking worship him. Build an altar to him in your closet and worship there, and then send him pictures.
That's crazy. I am the least, my friend. No, if I knew what you know at your age, oh man. All right, folks. Well, this has been one episode of Apostate of Mind. They call me a